Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining the BrightTALK webcam panel on connected and autonomous vehicles and the IoT impact across the ecosystem. My name is Haden Kirkpatrick, and I'll be hosting your webinar this morning. Thank you for Benjamin for kicking us off. I am joined today by Gaurav Bansal from Toyota USA, as well as Ravi from Honda. We are going to be discussing the impacts of the autonomous vehicles on multiple different businesses. And we're going to go through a brief agenda to discuss what autonomy is, what are autonomous vehicles, how do they work, what are the varying degrees of autonomy, what's the evolution going to be. We'll give you a primer in the category overall and how we see it evolving over the course of the next several years to decade. Then we're going to do a deep dive into the technology aspects of the category. What are the major players? What are the platforms? What are the innovations? What are the gaps that still remain? And where do we see cybersecurity fitting into the entire ecosystem? After that, we'll discuss a little bit about the business model impacts across industries. We'll talk a little bit about the OEM market. I'll give a primer on the insurance market. And then finally, we'll talk about how you as a business and as a business leader in your organization can prepare for the strategic shift that's coming. So that's the general agenda for today. I have an open question panel here on the right. If you have any questions throughout the course of the webinar, please feel free to chime in. We will address those both in context and at the end of the show. But before I get too far into it, allow me to hand it over to my colleagues for a quick introduction. Gaurav, would you mind introducing yourself to the team and discussing your role at Toyota and what it is you do?
Yeah, no, sounds good. And thanks, Haden, for starting us off. My name is Gaurav Bansal. I work at Toyota Info Technology Center. We are based in Mountain View, California. I've been working now almost 6+ years on connected autonomous vehicles. So I've been involved in various aspects of connected vehicles. Meaning technology development for 802.11p based DSRC. We have been very heavily involved in.
It sounds technical.
It is technical. It is, and I think we'll get a more chance to talk about what DSRC is, how we are already deploying it in Japan, what are the plans of U.S. government to eventually mandate DSRC technology. So we have been working on that very heavily, not only on the research side of it, but also on standardization, working on various field testing. We were involved in a model deployment where 3,000 ordinary cars were deployed with DSRC for more than a year. And now kind of recently from last couple of years, the focus of my group have been that what role connected vehicles will play in autonomous driving. So there are some important functionalities that autonomous cars have to do, like mapping, localization, perception. And currently we are very heavily doing research on if we made cars connected, meaning they can share sensor data among each other at a very low latency and perhaps in a very high data rate, not just using like DSRC technologies, but also like 5G technologies. How can we make various aspects of autonomous driving better? So I'll be like, while we go through the panel, I'll be happy to go in all these details.
Excellent. Well, we'll certainly get into all of those details going forward. Before we get too deep into it, I'm going to hand it over to Naren Ravi to discuss his background and his experience.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Haden and Gaurav. That was a pretty cool, decent one. So. Hey guys, I'm Naren Ravi. I work at Honda and I'm a senior technology manager responsible for connected product solutions, which includes telematics, autonomous driving, cybersecurity, and much more. So I come from a background of like almost 10+ years of experience in the automotive industry, where you guys might know like the first OnStar that has the dashboard. So I was in Detroit, so I came from Detroit. So I was part of the entire journey of how the whole connected ecosystem and also the connected vehicles transformed from just a simple connectivity to a huge spectrum of various flavors that are in the market today. So it's been a very enormous transformation, and that too with the new tech companies are coming up with a lot of challenging ways and innovative ideas. It's been a huge push for all the OEMs to start looking at not just only at a technology perspective, but also more towards what's better for a customer, how does it fit into the ecosystem, what is the business models going to be, how is the revenue systems going to look like. So there's a lot of different challenging trends that we definitely foresee in the future. But all the challenges and things are always for good, right? So we all trying to look forward for the safety first autonomy of the connected vehicles.
That's a great segue. So let's talk a little bit about what autonomy is, because there's, as I understand it, there are 5 stages of autonomy, ranging anything from, what we've got in market now to robots driving for us. So Gaurav, can you walk us through the 5 stages of autonomy and tell us your perspective on where you think we are now in the evolution of the industry?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I think as Haden just said, that we in industry like to talk about economy, or like to classify economy in 5 levels. And so I'll start with level 0. And level 0 meaning when we humans are driving the car and we don't have any technologies that are already available in the vehicle, meaning cruise control or advanced braking. Even not counting that, level 0 is just human controlling the steering, brakes, acceleration, everything. That's level 0. Level 1 is cruise control. That has been, OEMs have been deploying it for many years now. Advanced braking assist is also part of level 1 systems. Level 2, a good example of level 2 that many of you might be familiar with is Tesla autopilot system. The way it has evolved from cruise control is not only it can control my brakes and acceleration, but it can also steer the car for me. But very important thing to keep in mind in level 2 systems is human is supposed to be monitoring the car 100% of the time. Human is completely in the loop while the car is driving. These are level 2 systems. Tesla is already doing it. Other OEMs are maybe either have deployed solutions like Volvo, Mercedes-Benz, and companies like mine. We have already talked about deploying it in near future. Then level 3 system, which if you will talk to people in the industry, many of them would actually raise cautions or will ask you legitimate think about whether it will ever show up or whether it'll be ever deployed. The reason being, level 3 is that the car would do steering, brakes, and acceleration for me. And as a human, I'm not supposed to monitor 100% of the time, meaning I can maybe read my emails while car is driving, or I can take a phone call. However, if the vehicle need my assistant, it will notify me, and then I should be able to take back control of the car within few seconds. And when you'll talk to people in human factors, they say that it might be very difficult to design such a system, because if I'm on a phone and I might actually totally lose attention on that the car might need my assistance in future. And this is why people doubt that if we will ever see level 3 systems on the road.
So that implies that your perspective is that we'll skip right over level 3 and go to level 4.
That's probably true, and I think many people in the industry believe that we would never see level 3 being deployed. But I also want to say that's like maybe majority of the industry, but there are still people out there who thinks that we'll be able to design some deployable level 3 systems.
Well, from an insurance perspective, it certainly is the most confusing of the evolution path. When we talk about level 2, insurance companies are already struggling with how you handle someone in a Tesla who is supposed to be engaged but isn't. And they've let autopilot do the driving, and they've had an accident while they're typing an email. Tesla does not accept that in their commercial liability. Most auto insurers won't accept that in their personal liability. So how you handle those situations is already becoming stark. We struggle with how we'll handle a series 2 or a stage 2, much less a stage 3 or 4. So why don't you continue, or Naren chime in here and talk about what stage 4 and 5 is, so we can round out the understanding of the evolution for the observers.
Yeah, I think like from a stage 4 perspective, it's more towards like you have a hands off, eyes off, and mind off. That's what they call it, like in a simple terminology of the day 4, like level 4, which is like the high, the high automation. So this is where you can really take your hands off, you can eyes off, and then you are not really 100% concentrating on the roads or the things happening around you. So where it almost becomes like it's driving on its own, but it's still at some point in time you can take over the control if you see something danger that's forthcoming. And also the vehicle itself will alert you to take you over. So a good example of this one is probably the one that are in the making, for the last a few years, which I would say the Google's Waymo. So they are the one which is on at least as of now, which are being tested more than 1.5 million miles with driving on the level 4, which is still towards the 90% of achievement. There's still there's a 10% of possibility that there are still more errors and prone to issues and other things that the whole industry is still trying to address and sort it out.
Yeah, and if I can just chime in here, one way I think the industry is defining the level 4 systems that would be deployed is actually, that's one thing for research engineers, for example, at Google, to take over if the vehicle is not doing what you want it to do. But in the deployment, I think the level 4 systems would be seen as that there might not be any steering wheel. They would be driverless. But the scenarios where they can operate driverless would be limited. So we use these terms like they might be geo-fenced, meaning I might know certain roads where I can operate in a driverless manner, but there might be certain roads where I cannot. Then people started talking about weather fencing. Like if it's a bright sunny day, it can drive in a driverless fashion. But if it was raining, snow, because we have lots of technical challenges in those areas. So that's one way to think about level 4 deployment. And when we come to level 5, that's mean you can take the steering wheel away for all the scenarios, for all the roads, 24/7. And
at that point, it's a moving living room.
Exactly. And that's why I think if you talk to people in the industry, I think we are many years away from getting into a true level 5 system. And it's not just from the
Hello?
Hello, Naren?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, I think we may have lost Gaurav. That's okay. I'm sure he'll jump back in here in a moment. So let me hand it back to you, because he was just about to segue into when will we see this stuff, right? We already have, stage 1 has ostensibly been out in the market for quite a while. Lane departure warnings, adaptive cruise, those things were launched 5, 6, 7 years ago by a lot of providers, and now they're in a standard make and model of a lot of luxury cars, and they're starting to make their way down into the more traditional, mass market OEM stack.
That's right.
So, but whenever we hear someone talk about full autonomy, I hear things from stage 5, full autonomy. I hear things from 15 years out to 50 years out. And it's an order of magnitude jump on when these things, pundits will debate when they'll hit the market, but it's never the time span that we're looking at here is very broad and spans anywhere up to a half a century. So what's your perspective on when these things will start to hit market, and specifically stage 5? I think, we don't have to stage in a timeline for 3, 4, and 5. I think the audience is really curious, specifically this audience of high-powered professionals. When can I take my living room on the road and I can email and be productive on my hour morning commute? That's what they really want to know. When can I expect that I can have my mobile office?
That's right. Yeah. So that's a very interesting question. If I look at it, as I was just opening the note in a way that the whole transformation in the automotive industry is tremendous in the last 5 years. So all the OEMs, the way that things used to work, the software, the technology, and the digitalization back 10 years back to compare to the last 2 years, it's like a 1,000 times growth.
Yep.
So looking at all those areas and also all the new entrants of the new tech companies that are coming in and coming up with the new fresh ideas and open for collaborativeness, in all those aspects, I would just try to see how I just wanted to give you a picture of how we evolved into this whole autonomous driving, right?
Yep.
So it was all started with the engineers, the SAE engineers trying to figure out what could be a future forthcoming autonomous model, right? So then they started publishing the levels of autonomy, and with that, levels of autonomy. And in 2014, I guess they just published whatever the standards are. So and then NHTSA started jumping in 2012, 13, and 14. And then they started driving their own agenda and their own set of classifications and rules and the standards. But again, looking at the overall bigger picture, I'm sure everybody will agree that whatever the different levels of autonomy and the autonomous, the standards that has been out in the market where all the OEs and everybody's are looking towards for, that's a pretty good segue. And also NHTSA is almost looking at finalizing the rule making by 2018 to 2019, which is going to be one of the biggest Kickstarter for the entire autonomous industry, and also all the tier 1 vendors that we work with collaboratively, right? So from there, it's just I would say we are almost towards 2024 or 25-ish, looking at how much all the OEs and all the tier 1 vendors and new tech companies have committed their research, our research, how openly collaborating, how this is all shaping up. So looking at the huge growth potential and also the advancements in not just only the technology, but also the hardware, and getting the hardware at a reasonable and affordable price, right? So all those things are shaping up in a very, very high momentum, where I'm sure, I think it's by 2024 or 25, is probably, I can see that you have a full stage 5 vehicle that's hitting the roads where you can happily enjoy your mobile office.
Well, that's what I'm looking forward to. I got 10 years left until we get to that. Just under 10 years left until I get my full-on mobile office. So talk to me a little bit about, and thank you, Gaurav, for popping back in. We know you had some technical difficulties. So talk to me a little bit about the technology enablers. It's always been my assumption that you would need broadly distributed countrywide 5G, mobile data. You would need some level of highway infrastructure components to be able to enable this. This is not exactly my skill set. I'm an insurance guy, but I'm curious. What are the things that have to come together? What are the different technological advancements that have to converge to allow us to broadly distribute at scale these autonomous vehicles?
Sure. If I look at it, if I try to take this question in a different way, so what are all the different technology enablers can join hands to give this to the end customer, right? So I look at that from that perspective. So one is the connectivity. So we still one of the most advanced countries, where we have LTE and very high range and very high speed connectivities and all those areas. But there is still a lot of if you guys can think from a perspective that just the connected devices uses a lot of data to communicate back and forth. Think about the whole edge computing of autonomous chips that are sitting inside the cars, right? So it definitely has a lot of potential for a chatty, technology, or the transactional integrity. So it definitely adds, the connectivity adds a huge momentum. So that's what when we started this conversation, Gaurav was talking about DSRC, where there are new regulations are coming up, there are new OEMs, and its tier 1 suppliers are the only ones that are allowed to participate in the 5.9 gigahertz spectrum. And there are we have a lot of research going on in the Detroit and the Camp area, where the whole area is being converted for autonomous driving and the V2V concept prototyping. So there's a lot of momentum that's happening. And also, I would say the infrastructure and the kind of data that is required to keep up, and the collaboration and the technologies. So those are the different areas that's going to really drive how it's going to be presented to the customers. And not to forget about that, the deep learning and the artificial intelligence, where it's like all the gaming companies are coming up with a very high speed GPU chips. Like example, like the NVIDIA and Mobileye. These guys are really, really good in terms of, because that's what their like foundation and the principles used to be, because they used to be good in the gaming and how the visual imaging and sensors and all those stuff used to work. So it's all coming together. So I'm sure we will see a very better like a collaborative future forward.
Yeah. So if I can add on the technology aspects and also I think I like to go a little bit on the timeline question as well. So first on the technology part, so one thing that I see quite often is that autonomous driving groups, they sometimes work in in a different kind of part of the company than connected vehicle groups. And the reason being, so first talking about autonomous driving technology. So there are kind of two approaches that are emerging. One is a traditional robotics approach where you are heavily dependent on your having lots of sensors on the car. Cameras would be one of the main sensors, but radars, good GPS, LiDAR, sonars. You're going to have all these sensors on the vehicle, and then you're going to use kind of a robotics probabilistic approach to try to have a map, try to build a map of your environment. And these maps would be very high definition. These are not navigation maps that we use right now. They would have detail about where the lane markers are, how the road is curving, where exactly the traffic sign is placed, what the traffic sign is saying. So you need to have the map, and then you try to perceive all the moving objects and place them on the map. And that's how you try to navigate the car. That's one approach that's being heavily used. Second is kind of a deep learning based approach. Deep learning is it's a little bit of a black magic. That's also the term you might hear sometimes, because what you can do in a deep learning based approach is you can give your software a lot of data on how humans drive. They get for humans, we see through our eyes, and using that we are able to make drive decisions, like similarly teach software. And recently there has been some very exciting progress that has been reported.
That's a fantastic overview.
So these are kind of some of the things that autonomous groups are. Yeah.
No, I think that's a great.
And then
That's actually a great segue into a question that was asked by the panel, which I'd like to kick over to Naren. There were a few questions that were coming in from the panel that are relevant to technological interoperability. And the one question that I found very intriguing is so when you're in a semi-autonomous environment, right? You're in the stage 2 to stage 4 environment, or even in stage 3 if that does exist. What's the sort of OEM's perspective on the handoff between the human and the robot? So Gaurav was just walking us through an example of how when everything's connected via sensors, cars will talk to each other, they will talk to networks, and there'll be a lot of data passing. Now, whether that is a 4G technology or a 5G technology will probably be based mostly on capacity. If you have 1% of vehicles out on the road, 4G is probably fine. If you've got 70% of vehicles out on the road, you probably need more bandwidth. Let's hold aside the wireless networks for a second.
Right.
What is the expectations? You've got a session where a robot is driving you. A robot is talking to other vehicles. The robot detects an accident. Is it the OEM's responsibility then to hand that back to the driver for them to actually deal with the accident? If so, how predictive does that need to be? Or is it the OEM's position that the car should ultimately handle that? And then when do you see that being staged in? This is a question from the audience. This is actually a combination of a few questions from the audience.
Oh, great. I think that's a really interesting question. And I'm sure like you added your own flavor to it because you're coming from the insurance perspective, trying to understand things as well. So like I look at it from a perspective, okay, so the road that what we have transitioned and the road that we are trying to hit, we have working with all these different technology enablers, not just only because the technology that we are trying to do the research, but also the reason I brought up the concept of deep learning is every day go by, we have started adding those deep learning systems and the technologies into the cars. So that way it can understand and evolve over a period of time. So that's why there is a huge difference from stage 2 to stage 4, because you are working with different systems, different technologies, trying to understand. And in terms of working with the regulators as well, it's not just only the technology and also the regulators, understanding what is your liability, who is going to do that, like, whose technology it is it predictive, is it preventive? So there's so many other aspects that you look at it, but from the way and the technology perspective that we are looking at is, it's more towards you have an autopilot mode, and then if there is a warning, it will alert, the car will alert the customer much in advance to see if they can take over. And if not, it's going to take its own decision, try to see if it's going to in a very safer area and park itself.
And so when you combine those two concepts together, the early adopters are the ones that are at the biggest risk, because the machine will not have learned enough of the events that could potentially lead to an accident or could initiate an accident. So it's if you're an early adopter of an early stage autonomous vehicle, make sure you keep your hands on the wheel in the short term, because you don't want to be the guinea pig that helps the machine learn how somebody gets into car accidents.
No, not really. It's just what I'm saying. If you look at the whole LiDAR technology, right, that is being one of the most promising from a whole autonomous, which given even the Googles are way most the bigger companies like Honda, Toyota, and Mercedes, BMW, and all these different companies. There is a huge and heavy investment on LiDAR, and I'm trying to combine the LiDAR with what Gaurav was saying about the sonars and the stimulator sensors and so many other areas where it's not just only the real-time mapping, trying to create a three-dimensional image of the whole 60 meters or the whole 150 meters radius around you. It's just more towards you have built all these, but also work with so many different other tech companies and the enablers, trying to see what kind of algorithms, deep learning algorithms that they can bring into the open collaboration, right? So just for an example, there is a reason why companies let you save your millions of photos and videos at no cost, because those are the ones that are really used for all the beta testing to make sure, hey, it's you do all this parsing, you do all this, you work out all your algorithms, you do an actual live production beta testing to see how much mature your products are. It's not just the early adopters will have are going to be the guinea pig, as you said. It's just that there's a huge things that goes, because you're not just enforced to just only a technology perspective, but you're also enforced from a liability and a regulatory perspective as well.
Yep.
So that's why most of the time we work with Congress led with a federal NHTSA and trying to understand what their roadmap is, how is ours, and what kind of environment regulations, country regulations, data regulations. There's so many other aspects that plays into this sector.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's a lot of people participating in this space, and something that you mentioned earlier, there are people on this webcast that heard you say open innovation, networks of beta users, and heard security risks. Because if you're in an open dev environment, there are going to be people and nefarious actors in there whose interest isn't in ideating and adding to the quality of the product. There are going to be people in there who have motivations that are much more sinister than that. So maybe you can, Gaurav or Naren, you could spend some time talking about how we protect the technology platforms that we are putting into these vehicles, and more importantly, how that protects the driver.
Yeah, so if I can quickly give my perspective, so of course, security is gonna be it's gonna be of utmost importance when we are deploying these systems, and even when, for example, the connected vehicle systems that we have been has been deploying in Japan, the things that we're working on US. So what we have done, for example, in connected vehicles is every message that you send has a security certificate attached to it. And when you get this message from the receiver, first thing you do is you verify that it's coming from an authentic sender, and only then you act on that information. And similarly, on the autonomous vehicle, like when you have lots of onboard sensors, cameras, lidars, there would be an effort that someone cannot like hack into my car either through cellular connectivity or through DSRC connectivity and play with those sensors. I think there would be kind of a strict separation between onboard sensor and the data that's coming from outside. That's thing number one. And the second thing that we try to do is, so connectivity is really good for knowing information about what might be happening, 200 meters out. That's something my onboard sensors cannot tell me. Or I can get information from cloud connectivity about the mapping data or things like that. But then what we would have to design these systems in a way that the is related to brakes, accelerations, they can always be verified by these isolated, protected onboard system. So connected data in various contexts can act as it's providing me long-term information, but all the decisions that can lead into a crash would be verified by using onboard data that would be very, very or almost impossible to hack.
Yeah, it's like just add to what Gaurav was saying, the whole I would say the moment all this DEF CONs, the Red Hat, there's like all this Black Hat conferences and all these things are becoming more in terms of not just only encouraging the white hat hackers to collaborate with us, try to understand what we are trying to build, help us identify the loopholes so that way we can fix it. So there is a huge paradigm shift that is happening in the industry, and that especially within the autonomous sector, right? It's because it has to deal with the safety and the life of a human. So that's why most of the times there is a lot of potential where the investments are coming in or the effort is spent on even a day-to-day basis. Like the companies like Honda and we are changing into a DevSecOps kind of a principles. Like it's not just only a DevOps kind of a principle, but DevSecOps, which is trying to embed security as part of your life cycle. So it starts not just only from a manufacturing, like the software development, the sales, the service, the parts. There's so many other aspects that we try to understand, because it's not just only the first time you try to address the security, but also how do you keep up for even the aftermarket stuff, right? So if you have a parts that are having a problem, so now you try to replace the parts. How do you make sure that it's all in sync with the ecosystem of the vehicle where it can understand and trust each other? So there are various new technologies like quantum bots, there's so many other aspects the OEMs are doing the research. And also NHTSA is also coming up and trying to lay around the moment the Jeep hack came out. So they started enforcing very stringent and very strict firewalls, rules, and layers where how a message from a car can be treated and can be interpreted. So going back to what Gaurav was also giving a pointer on the segue of the vehicle to vehicle that the V2V kind of a communications. NHTSA is also trying to use and see how work with Booz Allen and try to come up with how we can make this whole a bigger ecosystem where it's not just only a company or just one car company based or an OEM based, but a more collaborative from all the OEs to see how we can centralize this whole authentication trust model, like SEMS. So there are so many other areas are coming in. So I'm sure the auto sector right now is going through a tremendous pressure of cybersecurity with so many other things coming up, because the way evolution happened is it was more towards an auto company, just a vehicle manufacturing, sales, trying to understand what it is. And the more and more technology advancements and elements are getting added and embedded. So now they are all becoming towards not just a car maker, but also a technology. So that's how they are seeing it. And that's how we have been working very closely with my tier one vendors, my partners, and also our solutions that we offer to the customers.
That's a fantastic segue into our next topic, because the only way, so as stuff gets more innovative, consumer demands will increase, and the ecosystem impacts will increase, meaning that will force companies to either evolve or die, right? That's basically exactly what you just said, right? So, but any particular player in this space has to consider the business model and the impacts of the other players to be able to appropriately adapt. And we had sort of sketched out a topic in this conversation to discuss impacts across the ecosystem. And I'd like to pick your brain on this I can give some context on the insurance perspective. I'd love to hear how you think the OEM business models will change. Then we can talk a little bit about the regulatory environment and the service environment. So from an insurance perspective, we're seeing this coming down the pipe already with stage 1 and stage 2 vehicles. And while those, lane departure warnings, early crash detection, some of these very basic features are in fact limiting the frequency of events, meaning we don't have as many accidents in vehicles that are equipped with those devices. That's their basic value proposition. But what we're also seeing is when events do happen, they have a higher severity. The sensors are expensive. They are difficult to replace. They require a special expertise to actually repair. What was a fender bender 20 years ago that cost $500 for a mechanic to sort of bang out and replace is now a $3,000 repair because you've got 7 sensors you have to replace, and it's not, you have to recalibrate a computer. You got a whole lot of work that you have to do to make that vehicle back to spec. So insurance companies are saying we have to chart both the ramp up of these sensors with the potential for an increase in the cost per loss for an incident, offset by fewer losses. It becomes increasingly complicated when you factor in the fact that only 10 or 15% of vehicles on the road have a lot of these advanced features. A lot of the vehicles on the road don't. So you have to sort of balance out someone who is ostensibly a good driver in a safe vehicle being on a road with drivers that aren't as good and aren't as safe and having a much, much more costly asset to cover. These are the things that insurance companies are torturing with. But in a stage 5 environment, where this is broadly distributed across 40 or 50% of the population, your frequency costs go down so far, it's almost to the point where you would just offer a what's called a comp and collision plan for when your car is parked. Like if it has hail damage or a tree falls on it, we got that covered. And that is very, very easy to cover because it's just a flat, set of repair costs. And things that are, fully autonomous, if Waymo's car or Uber's self-driving vehicle gets into an accident while the robot is driving, that's commercial liability. We don't particularly do that. So from an insurance perspective, it gets very, very complicated in terms of who's covering what and when, what happens when there's an incident, who's at fault in the incident, what is the value of robotic liability. And we flat out cannot solve it. I mean, insurance companies rely on actuarial data. They rely on the history. We can't do it ourselves. We have to partner with Google or Toyota or Honda and preferably all of the above, as well as probably an academic arm like MIT or NHTSA, and probably a big data company to really understand how all this stuff comes together and what insurance company sees versus what an OEM sees, to be able to effectively rate customers or to be able to effectively audit what happened in an incident. We spend a lot of money sending appraisers out to an event after the fact to figure out how an accident happened and then appropriately apply liability across the parties. In a connected car environment, we don't have to do that. We should just be able to plug into the OEM dashboard, extract the data, run it through our models, and then find proportional and or full liability based on what the computers actually saw, not what an appraiser sees. So those are some of the impacts in the insurance market that we're struggling with and toying with. And an open collaboration environment is the best way to potentially solve those. Talk to me a little bit about the OEM environment, because you guys are both, on very high up in 2 major massive OEMs. And I'm curious about how that business model will evolve, how you see participating with ecosystem partners, how you see the broader consumer value proposition across various different businesses lining up.
Sure, I'm sure you guys will be like, from an insurance side, you guys will be hiring not just only like all the different companies, but also the better lawyers, right, to fight.
Yeah.
So
it's a problem.
like, I feel like, just keeping the fun things aside. So That's a very interesting question because I look like all the OEs, not just recently, but they have been looking at this space and trying to get understand and see where they are, how our revenue models, how our business models shape up in the whole digitalized platform. So the most important aspect I would like to go back and see is like, why is there so much traction in the autonomous driving, right? Is it just like, isn't this just like any other like a automator, like your washer machine, like no, or your like refrigerator? But it's not, right? Because there's so much of traction because everybody looks at it from the perspective of this is like a third home for every human being. So on average,
at CES this year, there was a display where a car literally merged into a house.
It's a house, I
know. It is a bay window.
That's
it's a bay window, and so you have to go somewhere, and then you sit in there, and the door shuts, and off you go.
That's true. Yeah. So that's one of the primary section, like primary, area why so many companies, technology companies, OEM companies, everybody is driving and trying to capture their market share because there's a good quality amount spent in cars. So on average, every US citizen, every citizen or human, spend almost 45 minutes to an hour on a daily basis. And that too, if you're in a very dense metro areas like LA, San Francisco, where you spend a lot of time in driving from commuting from one place to other. It doesn't matter whether it is just your own car or it's a ride sharing car or it's anything else, right? So that's a huge momentum. So if I look at some of the numbers that are coming in, just really staggering. There is an estimate, and there is there are some I believe PwC did some study, and then they came up with how much is a connected car's market share and the revenues that's going to look like, right? So in 2015, it's almost $36 billion, and then 2016, it's almost a 45 billion, and 2017, the forecast is almost a $53 billion, where safety is going to have $18 billion, and the autonomous driving investments and the market share, it's going to be $14 billion, and the connected services are going to be $20 billion. But if I look at this forecast with a CAGR of towards 2022 target, it's almost $160 billion, because it adds so much to your safety, autonomous driving, and connected services, wherein there is a whole paradigm opens up for your collaboration, trying to pair up with even if you are trying to work and trying to set up a mobile office, for an example, right? You have to work with so many other technology companies. So there is a huge revenue sharing model that gets created. So working with the insurance companies, right? Even though we are just a level 0 or level 1 at this current situation, even there's so much collaboration that's happening in terms of connected insurance sector. It's if you are a consumer, you want a better pay, better cost. So why don't you share the data? So that adds understanding about how your driving behavior, what your driving patterns, and also the OEMs are all very heavily investing in terms of there are global service digitalization. You're partnering with so much things. So we are actually being pulled in both the sides, where one spectrum there is a huge demand from the customers, on the other spectrum there is a huge demand from the technology. So it'll be a very interesting future how things will shape up.
And it will put tension on OEM business models, because OEM business models have increasingly gone towards servicing, not making as much money on the sale of a vehicle, making more money on the servicing of a vehicle, and ostensibly event-based repairs and services will significantly decline. So I'm sure the dealer services component will change. I'm certain that a lot of the independent branch owners out in the market that are selling and servicing cars will struggle with some of the transition as well.
Yeah, so sorry guys, I'm a little bit having technical issues, so I'll lose you sometimes. But I think
it's hotel internet. It's not you. It is.
Yeah,
definitely hotel.
I'm just hotel in LA.
That's why you pay the extra $4 for the high bandwidth.
And I did, but it's still not high bandwidth. So I think this caution that we're discussing on how OEM market might change with autonomous driving. So I think we're already seeing level 2 deployment like Tesla Autopilot is one of the examples. And level 2 systems, especially consumers buying cars, I think that causes like less disruption than level 4 or level 5, because I still have my car. It's just that it's easier for me to drive that car than it's with level 1.
Yep.
But now when we go to level 4, where driver is outside the loop, and then I think very interesting, especially car ownership models starting to emerge. So we are already seeing that Uber, with some of their initiatives like Uber Pool, they're trying to get to $1 per mile. If I need to take a ride, which is like X number of miles, generally the consumer only has to pay X dollars, and that's starting to become affordable for more and more people. That maybe I can just do that, and I don't need to own a car, and including as a consumer, I don't need to pay for insurance for other things. But then if we can, from this kind of Uber model, people believe that 75% of the cost is of the driver. And if we'll take driver out of the loop, this price per mile can go down to maybe 20 cents, maybe 25 cents. So economically, it will become more and more, more and more incentives for people to just take these mobility services, and which they can use from, for their commute. But one thing I would like to, point out here, that at least some of us believe that there is a long time before we can get to level 5. I think we would have some companies, they would say that by 2020 we'll have fully driverless cars, and even 2020.
I thought we landed on 2024, 25.
Yeah. So I'm not so sure about it, and sorry, Naren, because I think what there is, we have real technical challenges that we need to solve before to get to level 5. Our sensors, for example, bad weather is a good scenario to understand. Our sensors are not able to collect data or good data in heavy rain, heavy snow. And so it's one thing, maybe we can have level 5 system in California, where most of the time in the year we have good weather, but in most of the country, there's always rain, there's always snow. So there could be long time before we get to level 5. It could easily be 2030. I think we have to see how the technology will evolve. And then from the market perspective, we have to see what's going to happen where we have level 4 systems. Then are consumers choosing to still keep their car, or they say that, I would use level 4 system when it's available, otherwise I go for the human driver. So I think that's what we have to see. And it would have impact on the OEM, the way OEMs are doing business. Then we might, rather than selling our cars to end consumers, we might be selling it to Ubers and Lyfts of the world.
I think that's highly likely, particularly in densely urban populated environments where parking in San Francisco is worth more than the car.
So, there's a statistics, 30% of the people in San Francisco are driving to look for parking.
That's right.
Yeah.
There's a very healthy industry of wasted time for trying to find parking in the San Francisco area, as I'm sure there is in New York. So we have a lot of really interesting questions coming in, but before we get there, I do want to have from each of you 1 minute very quickly on what firms can do to get ready for this future, whether it's 2025 or 2050, it's coming. And it's coming pretty fast as far as technology evolution goes. And from our perspective, we have a very healthy partnership approach. We leverage our parent company at Allstate that has a connected car platform company called Arity. Our parent company is diversifying into various different business units and trying to link that together, as well as partnering with OEMs at a very high level to start figuring out what the future will look like here. So maybe you guys can each spend 30 seconds to a minute each, just saying, from your perspective, from your vantage point, what can firms do, regardless of the business model? Like, what do you do to prepare for an autonomous future?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question too. In terms of, I would probably take this question in a different note. What are firms already doing to get there, right? So there are, if I look at it from a perspective of, if the automakers or the different firms are trying to look for what's their market share, how their revenue model, what's their business model, what kind of products that they want to target. So they always look at it like, okay, so you always start with like the first fast-paced emerging technologies that are easy to adapt, and that has a huge influence on the two sectors, right? That are like the digital natives and the Gen now. So it's almost like, you're talking about like 0 to 30 years age, which is contributing to almost like 140 million users at present. So most of the firms are trying to target towards what the early adapters, who will be the first driver of the driverless cars, right? Who will be the first passenger of the driverless cars? So there's like a lot of things already happening in terms of not just only from a research perspective, but also like there's a biggest digital push that are happening on every single step. And it's an example, like, the way that Samsung, Apple, like Honda, Toyota, like, Mercedes, all these companies are offering the products on a year by year basis, where the whole, like the model of 3 to 5 years time span of a product's incubation, it has evolved from 3 to 5 years to 1 to 3 years. So that's how speed and how fast the momentum is changing. So that's heavily, like, with so much of, like, careful investments, careful collaboration, openness, and also, like, looking at the perspective of providing a consistent results. It's not just I want to be in the market, but I want to be in the market with that consistency. That's what people look at it, right? So, and also, like, I would like to, like, see, like, if you look at it, most of the non-traditional players, like, goal isn't, like, not to off, like, it's to offer like autonomous driving as a feature, but rather offer mobility and try to make money out of it.
Yep.
So that's what I see from the digital push that is coming in the industry. Okay?
Excellent. And Gaurav, same question to you. Like, how does Toyota see a firm being able to partner and get ready for the future of the category?
Yeah. So for advice for firms, I think I have two main words: be innovative and be agile. I think this future is when it's gonna be here, it's gonna be here. And I think a good analogy to draw from is like a feature phone versus smartphone market. We were all using these feature phones like in 2004, 2005, 2006, and then the smartphone came and nobody's using feature phones at all. It's kind of totally disappeared.
Yeah.
So I think this future is coming, and it's maybe it's hard to say when exactly. It's hard to pinpoint the year, but we see this kind of big revolution happening in automotive industry and the way people are going to commute. So if you are a firm that's somehow tied to the current automotive industry, I think it's very important to think about how it's going to be evolved and how you can place yourself in this new autonomous connected revolution.
Excellent. Okay, well, that's the end of our current agenda. We've got some very interesting questions coming in, and a lot of them are very technical. And so this is way outside. This is way outside of my purview because I'm a strategy guy. I just talk pretty. But I will tell you, there's one here that I think is very interesting, and it's specifically related to Toyota. Last year at the Paris Automotive Show, Mr. Toyota raised a comment about how many miles would be necessary for autonomous vehicles to be fully tested and reliable. And the number he threw out was 8.8 billion miles. Is that, is that what we think the number of miles driven on the road by a robot needs to be for us to get to that point in time?
So of course I cannot disagree with Mr. Toyota. So let's go with 8.8 billion miles.
Okay, I'll check that one answered.
I think
Mr. Toyota's not watching this webcast.
But I think basically what I think the point that he's trying to raise and the way I think I understand is that, of course, when we are deploying these autonomous driving systems for Toyota, safety is very, very important. It's very important that when we are deploying these systems, they are safe and they're gonna we're not gonna deploy kind of half-baked systems. And the core technology that lies sensors, robotics, artificial intelligence, all these systems improve when we train them on lots and lots of miles. And this is why I think we strongly believe that before we will deploy this, keeping safety as paramount, we would have to train it on millions and millions of miles or billions of miles before these systems would be ready and considered good to deploy.
Excellent.
Yeah, just to add to what Gaurav was saying was like more, it's not just only the products that you deploy to the market, right? How are you going to win the customer trust? Because that's one of the key factor that has been driving the whole OEM industry. And with like people used to see like, what is the reliability? What is the car? What is the value? What is the benefit? Like how much is the worthy? How much is flexible? How reliable, like, how good it is for my usage, my viewpoint. So winning all those momentum and establishing the trust is definitely going to be a key strategy from the OEM's perspective. So if I look at like in terms of as like there was a very famous the conversation that I had, like I wanted to bring it up, like what John Agustin from DOT said: when people can see what the car can see, they are convinced.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen the pictures of the LiDAR and what the car is actually interpreting, and they're seeing around corners and they're seeing past vehicles. It's amazing stuff. So lastly, before we close, there's one fun question that I want to get out there, and it's on this call, people are observing us, and they're all technology innovators, and they're all business leaders, and they're all very excited about the future. And we had a question come in about when can I expect cars to be flying at speeds of 500 miles per hour or more, either hovering in the air or taking full flight. This is something that Americans are very jaded about. Back in the 50s, we were told we'd have flying cars by now. And now we're just being told that it's going to be a car on the road like anything else, but a robot will be driving it.
Right.
When can we expect cars to be airborne? When can we expect consumer cars to be airborne?
Yeah, I think like I would say like the Star Wars era is not really far away.
I assume by that you mean everybody has a flying vehicle. Not everybody can warp into hyperspace.
That's right. Yeah, it's like I think it's an interesting thing. It's like it's a constant evolution, and also it's a consistent evolution. It's not just like you just come out of nowhere and trying to make a market or trying to make a product, right? So there's so much of a supportive ecosystem that needs to be built up and thought through before you can get there. Because if you want to do all in one shot, there would be like a lot of different areas that still left unopened or it's still question mark. So where it might risk the people the life of the humans.
Yeah.
So that's one of the interesting aspects is how it is shaping up.
Yeah. Totally.
So, yeah, and if I can add to what Naren is saying, so you're again asking us to predict the dates. And then it's so 10 years from now, you guys gonna come back. And, you said 2025.
Nobody's gonna be alive to hold you accountable, right? I mean, you got to set the date for flying cars far enough out where
what if it comes before we are dead? Then what's gonna happen?
That's right.
So I think, kind of jokes apart, it is true that we have seen some companies, especially some startups, starting to work on flying car. I think there are some reports out of Japan that Toyota might show that as part of 2020 Olympics. But I think I want to caution you.
Looks like
these are maybe very, very and like I know some other companies here. Airbus has talked about in Silicon Valley they have a lab which is working on it. But I think we might be many years. I think we probably don't even know the caution or we don't know the answer that whether it's going to be practical. Are we there to say that we will see flying cars in any in our lifetime?
That's a perfect engineering response. As a strategy and marketing guy, I like to say it'll be 2100. You'll have flying cars in 2100, and if you don't, I won't be around for you to criticize about it.
Yeah.
So that is the top of the hour. I'm going to call the webinar now. Thank you both for attending, and thank you for walking us through this very complicated topic, and specifically how it impacts other businesses. And thank you to all the attendees for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the content, and we hope you enjoyed the presentation. At this point, I'm going to close the call. Of course, if you have any questions, you can continue to submit them to the BrightTALK info line, and we can answer them offline.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks, Gaurav, and also thanks, BrightTALK, for giving you a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.